the pleasure of meeting. My name is Devontae Wilson. I serve currently as the 75th president of the Young Democrats of North Carolina. And again, I just want to say thank you again for coming. I want to give a great shout out to the leadership of the Young Democrats of North Carolina Black Caucus, Chairwoman Tia Canada, and Vice Chair Kelvin Stallings for putting this event on. And again, we're so thankful for our guests who are with us. Again, we do not take it lightly at all. You could have been on any Zoom call, and some of you may just be getting out of one and probably getting ready to head into another when we're done with this. So we definitely want to take, advantage of your time, but definitely not take it for granted. And so again, thank you so much. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Vice Chair Kelvin Stallings.
Gotta unmute myself first. So next on our agenda for today is the Black Caucus welcome from our chairwoman, Tia Canada.
Hey y'all, I hope you all are well. My name is Tia Canada and I am the chairwoman of the Young Democrats of North Carolina Black Caucus. And so I just kind of want to tell you what the Black Caucus serves as, what we do, and what our purpose is for YDNC. So the Black Caucus is a collaborative space for Black and African American people and our allies throughout North Carolina to come together to discuss issues that affect us personally. We plan to do this primarily through programming and various workshops, which include town halls and political engagement workshops and forums, and through programming and partnered programming like this here. And the purpose of the caucus is to really reinforce the notion and presence of Black and African American people being civically engaged, and to continue conversations surrounding politics that affect the Black Caucus here in our state. So yeah, that's a little bit about our purpose and what we do and what we plan to do for this upcoming cycle. Again, if you have any questions, you can just ask me or Kelvin. So yeah, thank you so much for being on the call, and thank you for our panelists for being here, and I will turn it back over to Kelvin.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So next is the introduction to our moderators. Today we do have from the Black Caucus, Dominique Ashley from Fayetteville, North Carolina, and we have Councilman Quentin Jackson from Hereford. And if you want to just give a 30-second spiel on each of you about a little bit about yourselves.
I can go first, it doesn't matter. Well, like you said, my name is Quentin Jackson. I am a council member, the youngest ever elected in the town of Hereford, North Carolina. We are home to Jim Catfish Hunter, also home to the only operational S bridge in the nation and good seafood. I serve currently as the regional director for the National Black Caucus of Local Elected Officials, and I am the second vice president of the North Carolina Black Elected Municipal Officials. I'm interested. Kevin has brought me on to YDNC, and he's put me on the ground running. He let me know that when I recruit, I make sure I put you to work. So I'm eager to get to know all of you guys more better and represent Northeastern North Carolina. So I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you, Quentin. Dominique?
And good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Dominique Ashley from Fayetteville, North Carolina. I don't have a long introduction. I'm just a member of the Young Dems here in Cumberland County, and I'm interested to be
Thank you, Dominique. So the rundown for today, when we go into the questions, it'll be a 2-minute response limit to each question asked to each panelist. And after the preset questions that we have, it'll be one rapid fire response question at the end. And time permitting, we'll give 2-minute closing remarks to all of our panelists. So at this time, I will turn it over to our moderators, Quentin and Dominique, to get this panel rolling.
Thank you, Kelvin. Before we get started, we're going to let the panelists introduce themselves. So when I say your name, please give us a brief introduction and bio about yourself. And we're going to start off with President Joshua Harris-Till.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, y'all. I'd like to say my name is Joshua Harris-Till. I'm the national president of the Young Democrats of America. I'm actually the first Black man to ever hold this position. I do a lot of work in Oklahoma, finance director for the Oklahoma Democratic Party, DNC executive committee member, just doing the work and glad to be here with you all.
Thank you. Next person we're going to go to is Greear Webb.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be here with you all and see some familiar faces. My name is Greear Webb. I'm a rising sophomore, proud to be a Morehead Kane Scholar at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm also the co-founder of Young Americans Protest and NC Town Hall, which those two groups focus on purporting legislation related to gun violence prevention as well as racial equity. And I'm proud to have been one of the leaders and to continue to be one of the leaders of the Raleigh Demands Justice protests, standing in solidarity with Minneapolis, as well as pushing for policy change here at the city level in North Carolina's capital city. Thanks. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. And next we have Representative Raymond Smith, Jr.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to address such an illustrious group of individuals. As you can see over my shoulder, I hail from the North Carolina A&T State University, Greear. I am as of 2016, believe it or not, I'm the first African-American to ever win the at-large seat on the Board of Education for Wayne County. And of course, I now serve in the North Carolina General Assembly and represent District 21, which encompasses Wayne County and Sampson County. I'm looking forward to this town hall. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Felita Donnell.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry I'm late. My name is Felita Donnell. I am the current president of the African American Caucus of the North Carolina Democratic Party. I have served on the Council of Review for the Democratic Party, Democratic Women, etc. I am a proud soaring eagle from North Carolina Central University. To all those Aggies out there, and also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Ms. Donnell. My apologies for mispronouncing your name. And last but not least, we have Judge Lora Cubbage.
Good morning, and that is Lora Cubbage, but that's okay. I'll take whatever you call me. I am Superior Court Judge Lora Cubbage, and for Mr. Smith, I hail from the illustrious North Carolina A&T State University. And for you, Mr. Webb, I got my law degree at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It is my pleasure to be with you all, and I know we got an ego on here. I saw a couple of heads nodding, but we're in good company, and we'll accept you all just as you are. I see you, Mr. Cromartie. But good morning. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, you do.
You know, and I just don't want, you know, I know everybody forget about everything east of 95, but Viking Pride is in the building. Ain't that right, Kelvin? The Viking Pride. Please don't forget about Elizabeth City State University. Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get the panel started. And our first question is to President Joshua Harris Till. Your question is, as president of Young Democrats of America, how do you envision Young Dem chapters being involved in the conversation of racial injustice? And how could chapters support the Black Lives Matter movement?
That's an excellent question. So I actually have been on the front line of a lot of organizing for the protests here in Oklahoma City. What we told everybody on the first day is that we are using this as an opportunity to get a meeting. And once we get that meeting, we are going to demand the changes that we want to see in our community. If you are out there protesting, but you don't have a plan for, you know, calling for the mayor or calling for the city council or calling for whoever it is that you're advocating to for those changes, then you're already starting on the wrong foot. I'm glad to say that here in Oklahoma City, after a couple of days of protests, we demanded a meeting with the mayor. We got that meeting, and he's establishing a task force that's going to look at the de-escalation policy that our officers have here in Oklahoma City. We actually rank #2 in the nation for police-involved fatalities. And so it's not just about showing up to the protest, but it's about making sure your voices are heard, building that coalition, calling on people within the Young Democrats, which is what I have done here in Oklahoma City, to join us when we have these meetings, to make sure that they bring a different perspective. You all deserve a seat at the table. Some of you already know that. Some of you are learning that. I hope that by the end of this conversation, you all realize that. And when you get at that table, it's your obligation and your responsibility to make sure that you invite others to sit at that table, to make sure that others are also making sure their voice is heard, because we can't speak for everybody if we don't talk to everybody. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you so much. And so our next question is to Mr. Webb. What is the importance of being a community organizer during this time? And what are the ways that we can aid community organizers working to fight systemic racism / racial injustice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, I'm happy to be here with you all this afternoon. Here in Raleigh, speaking from my perspective first, I've been grateful to be an organizer on the ground and be able to work with the community here in continuing to uplift the communities that have been doing the work for 5-6 years, some of which when it comes to police brutality and police accountability here in the capital city. And so ways that you can encourage and support community groups in your own city, in your own town, is by doing the research, right? I like to say that change equals protest plus education plus policy change. And so we're continuing to educate and we're continuing to protest. And now, as Brother Harris Till mentioned, we're looking now for policy change with our elected officials. And so continuing in your communities to keep the pressure up, whether that's in person if you're able, or on social media and by writing strong letters of support for those groups on the ground. It could look like donating supplies to local groups who are protesting, whether that be water bottles, hand sanitizer, masks. It also looks like doing the research and then having those one-on-one conversations, right, with the people in your cities and towns that have been doing the work for years, or if maybe a new group has just started up, supporting that group and saying, you know, something has to change and now's the time to act. The time for lip service was in the past. And so anything I want to do, if anything right now, is to help those local groups on the ground figure out how they're going to act and figure out how you can support them. And so from the community organizing perspective, from your point, or to your point, it's important that we continue to encourage not only each other, but community members that may be on the fence. Do I want to get involved, you know, full heartedly, or do I want to kind of stay back and remain in the shadows? And now is the time for everybody to come out regardless of color, right? And say, we're in support of Black lives, we're in support of police reform. And that's what we're looking to do sooner rather than later.
Okay, and I guess I am next to Representative Smith. On June 9th, 2020, Governor Cooper signed Executive Order 145, which established the North Carolina Task Force for Racial Equity and Criminal Justice. What do you think about the order, and why is there a need?
Well, again, thank you for inviting me. And there's been a need for a long time. It's not just now. The need for that task force began long before I was born. But the fact that it's here now, the need being so much, I'll say, so prevalent at this particular point in time. The bottom line is, until we have this conversation, this very uncomfortable conversation, progress will not be made. There are people who've been allowed to bury their heads in the sand. There are people who've been allowed to avoid the issue. And I think it was just stated a few moments ago, you can no longer sit on the sideline. You're either for racial justice or you're not. You're either for social justice or you're not. There's no middle ground anymore. So the governor's executive order was timely in a way, but certainly necessary. And I believe that as we go forward, we should not let up on our momentum. We should maintain this momentum at all costs. There's no way we can slow down now. We cannot take our foot off the pedal at this point. So yes, I do believe that it was a very timely order, and I will personally, because I have a direct line to the governor, as many of you have, I'm sure, but I will personally make sure that the governor does not let up on this issue.
Just stay on Christy Jones.
Yes.
My next question is to Judge Lora Cubbage. What is the first step in rooting out racial bias in the judicial system? How would you introduce conversation of racial injustice with your colleagues?
Again, thanks for having me here. And that is a great question. I think the first part of rooting out racial injustice in the judicial system is to acknowledge that it's there, not to acknowledge that it's been there. We have a magnificent leader leading us in the judiciary, which is Chief Justice Sherry Beasley. And she has begun and admonished each county to follow up on the things that she's put in place. Like, she has a school and justice partnership. She has a faith, community, and justice partnership going. And these are partnerships that will allow for the faith and community. It's for attorneys to go into the churches and give advice pro bono. It's for schools to come in partnership with the court system to try to keep our young people out of the court system by doing some type of alternative plans for them. I think that judges need racial implicit bias training. We don't, that's not a mandate for that. There are some classes that we can take or some things that we can do if we choose to, but that has to be done. Running for the North Carolina Court of Appeals now, before the shutdown, I got to travel across the state. And there are places across the state of North Carolina where they still have not seen an African American in an elected position. And when you say, I think Mr. Harris Till said he's the first African American man, I am only the fourth African American to serve on the Superior Court judge seat here in Guilford County, and only the second African American woman. When I get elected in November to the Court of Appeals, and I will be the only African American woman up there, regardless of what happens. And that's a 15-seat judiciary. So not only is there racial issues going on with inside of each individual branch, but we also have them in our elections, and we need to continue to try to root those out. So those are things that we're looking forward to doing in the justice system.
And why have you, Judge? We also have another question for you as well. Many African Americans, they lack faith in our justice system and overall democracy. What steps should local, state, and federal government officials take to help rebuild the trust in our nations among African Americans?
I think one of the key steps is transparency. I think one is transparency, two is access to justice. A lot of us with the protest, especially a lot of elected officials and those of us that can make a difference, while we understand the protest, and that's certainly a constitutional right, the protest, we don't understand the looting or the rioting. However, if you go back in history, you will understand it. But at the same time, we cannot get distracted by the few that wants to loot and riot to distract from the peaceful protest and the message. We've got to stay focused on the message. And the message that we're getting in the judicial system that has been there, I believe, is that people think that there are two separate justice systems, that there is one for those that that are probably of the Caucasian ethnicity and have money, and then there's a justice system for the rest of us, as we say. That is not the way it should be. Not the way it should be at all. And, you know, we have to stand up as leaders, including in our own fraternities, which for me, it will be the judicial fraternity, and call it out. If we see that there is some racial injustice going on, even if it's my colleague that sits beside me every day, I've got to be willing to stand up and call it out. Otherwise, I'm no better. That's it.
Thank you so much, Judge. And our next question is for President Donnell. How is the African American Caucus engaging African Americans to help increase turnout at the polls this November?
Okay, thank you so much. And I am so sorry. Let me apologize again for my Zoom connection. But nevertheless, That's a timely question because yesterday, me and a committee had a meeting with the party leadership. So what we're trying to do for this election season and beyond is to look at address the issue that Black votes count past November. And one of those big things is the lack of precinct organization in precincts in North Carolina. Over 48% of the African American precincts in North Carolina are not organized. And what we're trying to do is to get voters throughout the state to we're going to work on this initiative to get these precincts organized. Because if your precinct is organized, you have a say on who's going to be your county chair, for example. If your precinct is organized and for some reason I'm an elected official and I'm not able to complete my term, you have a say on who's going to fill that seat. But if your precinct is not organized, you do not have a voice in your Democratic Party other than going to vote in November. So we need more people, especially African Americans, engaged in not only voting, but organizing your precincts and being active in your local party, period. So we're going to be introducing more information about that later and getting those precincts organized, figuring out some type of way to measure the success of party chairs throughout the state of North Carolina to determine whether or not they're targeting those African American communities to get organized instead of just voting in November. Thank you.
So my next question is to Joshua, President Joshua Harris Teal. There are so many initiatives that already exist to combat racism. What efforts should we as Young Democrats support that are already in place?
Running for office is the first one. Here's the thing, we can lobby and advocate and call people and try to get them to do the things that we want them to do, or we can be the people making the decisions. And so I tell young people all the time, run for office, find a mentor, learn exactly what it is that you need to do, work on some campaigns, get some experience under you so that you know what a good campaign looks like and what it doesn't, and then run. If you're that person that just absolutely can't run for office, then that's okay, but encourage a friend to, encourage your mentor to, start working with your legislators, start having conversations with them, develop a dialogue. Don't allow yourself to not have a seat at the table or have representation at that table. The best way to do that, I think, in my personal opinion, is to have a seat at that table yourself by being the elected official. But if you can't do that, make sure that you elect people and advocate for people who feel the way about the issues that you do, who represent the values that your community cares about, and who will answer when you call them, especially about issues that are important to the community. So that's the best way to get involved. There's tons of organizations who are doing amazing work, but at the end of the day, if you want to see that policy change, be the person writing the policy.
Okay, and to Representative Raymond Smith, what message should we be sharing with our children during this time of global pandemic to a rogue president with racially divided nation?
Well, excellent question. And I just want to follow up before I get into that on something that Mr. Harris Teal just said. And what he said was very prominent and powerful. We must run for office. I'm the only African American in a 5-county region, and I'm the only Democrat in a 5-county region here in southeastern North Carolina. For some reason, white Democrats, save my friend on the line, Donna Lake, will not run for public office in southeastern North Carolina. There's a Democratic desert down here. And there are a plethora of opportunities, but for some reason there's this disconnect. And I think the Democratic Party has given up on Southeastern North Carolina, and they should not give up on Southeastern North Carolina. I'm talking Duplin County, I'm talking Lenoir County, I'm talking Sampson County, I'm talking Johnston County, and places south of that. Onslow, yes, Onslow too. And we've got a opportunity here. And going back to what Mr. Teal said, we absolutely have to run for office. Here in Wayne County, in the 2018 election, we let 4 Republican school board members run unopposed. However, we turn around and complain about the decision that the school board makes. Makes no sense to me. How dare you complain about the decisions that they make when you didn't even put anyone on the ballot? And believe me, we begged and pleaded. Kelvin is shaking his head, but he knows. We did everything we could to try to find candidates. But now that the school system is $5 million in debt and the superintendent has been asked to step down, now everybody's coming to me and saying, well, what am I gonna do? Where were you in 2018 when we were begging people to run for public office? So we've got to really, and thank you, Mr. Harris-Teal, for that. Now, getting back to the question you asked me, what do you tell young people in a time like this? Well, I have children, age range from 34 to 3. Don't y'all laugh, okay? But I do. And stop laughing, Judge Cubbage. But it's a fact. And I can tell you that I have 2 daughters in college. I have a son in the military, and I have a middle schooler and a youngster. But I can tell you this, my conversations with them are very clear, and they're very explicit, and they're very to the point. I use an example. I put my District 90, my House 95 tag on my car. And when I put my tag on my car, I've been pulled by the police 2 times since I put my General Assembly tag on my car. And both times that I was pulled by the police, there was no reason to pull me other than the fact that they ran my tag. But when they ran my tag, they ran it incorrectly. So it came back as not matching the car. They didn't know how to run a government tag. Well, make a long story short, I take those type of situations and I explain to my children that the only reason that I can come up with that my tag was run is because I'm a Black man driving a Hummer, because I had not broken any laws. I had not failed to use my turn signal or anything. And the second cop that pulled me over in Garner basically said, after finding out that it was a House of Representatives tag, he looked at me and he said, oh, well, this must be your wife's truck. And I was like, wow, no, I'm the legislator. And it's the implicit bias. I have to explain that to my children. I have to explain to them that people make judgments about you without even knowing who you are because of the way you look. So yes, those conversations have to be had early and often. And they need to be had with our white friends. They need to understand it. Because when I told this same story to one of my cohorts in the General Assembly, she gasped and she said, wow, my husband and I were cleaning out our desk drawer the other day, and we saw where he had 2 years worth of notices for his tags to be renewed. He hasn't been pulled over in 2 years, and he's been driving on expired tags for 2 years. So it's a reality that we must tell our children about, and we must let them know to be prepared. Thank you.
And I will tell you guys, we have more questions, right? And all through fairness, we were supposed to, as moderators, send a list of questions, but today my device has not been working, so I don't have all my questions I'm supposed to have. So Ms. Dominique has been really fronting the load. I have questions that I'm gonna ask, but for the next 2 questions, I'll let you ask Dominique, and we'll try to, I guess, wing my question with you guys. You know, the Zoom thing is really driving me crazy because, like, it's like it chooses when it wants to work. So I'll let you go the next 2, Dominique.
Okay, so we're actually going to go back to President Donnell. And the question is, what role can faith communities play in the fight for racial injustice?
Okay, they could play, to me, the faith communities could play a very significant role. And if you go back in history, the civil rights movement was born and bred in the church. The problem is today, I think that a lot of faith communities are using the issue of separation of state and church and state as an excuse. It's always, even back in the 60s, that was the case, but especially in the Black church, they continue to be active in the civil rights movement. So as far as my opinion about the faith community, I think they just need to let history repeat itself and become involved, more involved in political activities, because even today, especially in the African American churches, we still have church goers, whether it's going to be in person or virtually. They're going to do what Pastor John Doe says do. They're going to vote for whomever pastor says vote for. That person may or may not be best for their interest, but because that pastor has so much influence over that congregation, they're still going to follow his lead or her lead. But is that necessarily a good lead all the time? That's another conversation that I'm not going to get into, because some of the, just speaking for my city, some of their choices I don't necessarily agree with. But to answer your question, yes, I think the church could be so influential in politics that would not be self-serving to the pastor, the leader of that church, as opposed to the general good of everybody involved.
Thank you so much for your answer. Now we're going to go to Mr. Webb. So all over the country, we are seeing Confederate monuments, including the Confederate flag. They're coming down. And for oppressed minorities, this is a sign of progress. However, others view it as we're abandoning their history. How should we approach this topic with those who do not see the significance behind the importance of these monuments and Confederate flags coming down?
That's a great question, Dominique. First and foremost, I just want to say that I want to make sure that when we talk about the general conversation more broadly, we don't forget the spark that was George Floyd and the highlight that he put on the issue of police brutality. And so first and foremost, we must understand that we must continue to apply pressure when it comes to legislation and policies that deal with racial equity, but specifically police brutality. But yes, the Confederate monuments and their removal is part of the larger movement to erase this master narrative and begin to rewrite our history as a nation. And so it is extremely important that that is a part of the conversation as we look more broadly. And so for people that don't understand, I would just ask that they educate themselves, right? And we as Black folks understand it. A lot of the time, white people do not understand and claim it as their history. But if you look back, you'll see the history. You can see it in the articles of incorporation of the Confederacy, the blatant racism and the blatant wanting to own other people that do not look like them. That's not who we are as a country. That's not what we should want to represent. And so by allowing people to understand that history and pushing specifically our white brothers and sisters to become stronger allies in this movement for justice, I think those are some of the ways in which we can begin to right the wrong. And so it is good. I'm glad to see that we're beginning to take these down. Even at my school, we've lifted a moratorium that we had and are beginning to rename buildings after people that were not white supremacists and did not rape and own and take advantage of Black people in this country. And so that is, again, part of the movement. But I just don't want us to forget the spark and continue to push people to understand, right, that education, but also understand the necessity of policy change, and specifically when it comes to justice in our police forces.
Okay, and I guess that leads with me, and I just want to say thank you to all of you guys. I think this is very, very great things that we are doing. But to President Hill, I just had a question. This is a question that I've been getting a lot of heat for asking, because I always ask it when there's a room full of people. How do you feel about holding Democratic Party leaders accountable for switching sides, switching party sides, going Republican? I just want to touch on this because, can you hear me or you can't hear me? I don't know. Okay, so you're on mute, and I guess you can hear me though. You're not in your head saying you can hear me. How do we go about holding accountable? And I just want to say, municipal elections, as we all know, are nonpartisan election throughout the state of North Carolina. So what do you see? And we've seen in the last 4 municipal elections where Republicans ran a municipal election and Democratic people backed them, and it's come up in court several times and throughout the Democratic Party. How do we go about holding them accountable for those actions, our party leaders? I guess we're having audio problems. Y'all can hear me or can't hear him?
Can't hear Joshua.
President Harris Till, I think we can't hear you. I think your audio is out.
And that's usually what happens when you ask tough questions. I'm playing with you. Your audio is out. We can't hear you.
I don't think he can hear us because he's still talking.
Okay. Well, I'll go to Judge Cubbage.
Can someone send that to him in the chat?
I just did.
Okay. I'll go to Judge Cubbage. On the Court of Appeals, which you are running for, how would you advocate for getting wrongfully convicted African Americans released from prison?
Before I answer that question, I'm gonna pull up Mr. Smith, and let me go back to the question that was given to President about how the faith community can become active. And I want to go back to that because me and some other candidates are starting an initiative. One way the faith community can be active is we're hoping that they will get a request for an absentee ballot, print off hundreds of them, and let whether it's their greeter ministry, their deacon ministry, pass them out to folks as they're coming into church, and take maybe 10 minutes of their Bible study or 10 minutes at the end of their Sunday service and say, we're going to fill out these absentee request forms. And we're hoping to try to get some donations to also supply the churches with some envelopes that are already stamped and addressed to the State Board of Elections. And then each person would just have to fill out their address in the return. Because whether you want to vote in person or not, we are advocating for everyone to request an absentee ballot, so that in case this pandemic is in full force in the fall, that our voters have an opportunity to vote if they cannot get to the polls. So I did want to put that out there. And each one of us, however many participants, if we go back and tell our faith leader or someone in our faith community, we should be able to spark this across North Carolina. And especially in southeastern and northeastern North Carolina, that's where we need to flip these seats. And that's where we have the least amount of voter turnout, is in eastern North Carolina. So we have to focus. Now, to answer your question that you asked me, as a judge, I don't advocate for anything. I am there to interpret the laws. However, this is why the judges matter, and especially the Court of Appeals judges. 80% of the law, case law, is made at the Court of Appeals, and that's where it stops. 80% of those cases that we will see at the Court of Appeals are going to be criminal cases. And 80% of those criminal cases that we see are going to have African American defendants. And when they are making appellate motions to have their cases open and have their cases reviewed, it is my duty as a judge to make sure that happens. And if for some reason I am on a 3-judge panel and I feel like it should happen or it should be remanded or should be reviewed for any reason whatsoever, for, you know, for sentencing or our application of law or our process and procedure error, and my 2 other panelists, judge panels do not. Even if I'm the lone dissenter, that gives that defendant an automatic right of appeal to the Supreme Court. And being that judges, we're that last stop. Whatever the legislature does, whatever the executive branch does, when those things are challenged, it is going to land at the hands of the courts. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to land and stop at the hands of the Court of Appeals. So that is how I'm going to make sure, not advocate, but make sure that when I get to the Court of Appeals, that every case is looked at not as a number on a docket, but as peoples whose lives are affected. Because we're talking about at the Court of Appeals, you're talking about the difference between freedom and liberty. And there's nothing in between. So I don't take that lightly.
And Judge, I do want to apologize for that because I don't want to get nobody in trouble. And I just realized the word in which I use. But Representative Smith, I do want to ask, what do you recommend for an organization as far as handing down and mentoring local and young people to run for office?
Great question. The effort is worthwhile. I started a group here in Wayne County. I call it the GOLD Group. GOLD is an acronym for Goldsboro Leadership Development. This is an effort that myself, Representative Candy Smith out of Pitt County, we talked about it. We know how important it is to start locally. Local elections absolutely matter. We are trying to get young people involved in the process. We're trying to get them engaged. And the basis or the foundation of that engagement is the emphasis on local elections. And I'll use as an example. With the COVID-19 package that we sent to all 100 counties across the state of North Carolina, and I'll use Wayne County as my example, we sent Wayne County $2.3 million. Well, the $2.3 million, I see our future Senator Donna Lake down here shaking her head. She knows all about what I'm about to say. We sent that $2.3 million to Wayne County. However, it's up to our 7-member county commissioners to determine how that $2.3 million is going to be spent. And of our 7-member board on county commissioners, 5 of them are Republican and 4 of them ran unopposed. Here we go again. Okay, so we've got to understand that what is going on in Washington, D.C. absolutely has nothing to do with what's going on in your county. Stop the focus on Washington. That's a distraction. The real work is in your community, in your county, in your city, on your school board. That's where the seats matter, because the millions of dollars that we send to these local municipalities across the state of North Carolina, the determination on how the money is spent is made by your local elected officials. We in the General Assembly do not tell them, we cannot tell them how to spend the money we give them. It's very simple. And so when folks get upset and bent out of shape about the fact that the school, the poor school over here in the low wealth district is not getting their fair share, you need look no further than your school board. You need look no further than the makeup of your school board to find the answer. And if the answer is not satisfactory, get somebody to run for the school board. Okay? And it's not rocket science, but it's a misperception that Washington, D.C. is somehow connected to Sampson County. No, Washington, D.C. and Sampson County are miles apart, literally and figuratively. Okay, it's what's happening in the confines of your county as to where you can make a difference, and it really boils down to local elections. So I hope that was a good response for you.
Thank you, Representative Smith. And for the sake of time for everybody, we're gonna move on to the closing remarks. We want to give all of our panelists 1 minute to be able to close out the panel. So we'll start with Representative Raymond Smith. You have 1 minute.
Kelvin, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Kelvin?
Yes,
So
sir.
before you do that, can I have just 30 seconds with Representative Smith? I just want to rebuttal. I would ask you as a municipal official, right? Please don't send the county any more money if you can, because you guys are sending the county these monies and the municipalities are not seeing it. That's part of the problem as a local elected official that I advocate for. And Candy Smith, she's my mentor. I took over for her with the Black Caucus. But I also want to implore, just to piggyback, because I got 10 more seconds that Kelvin is going to give me. I just want to piggyback on that. We appreciate, all that you're doing, but I do want everybody to understand when you're talking about a police department, these police department falls under municipalities, which is your local government, not sheriffs. I don't want anybody to not get confused. So I'm begging, I'm asking, please don't send the county any more money. There's got $700,000 for equipment and told us they ain't giving us a dime. So I just want to throw that out. Thanks, Kelvin.
Most definitely. Starting Representative Raymond Smith, you have a minute. Closing remarks.
I'll start right there. Mr. Jackson, if it were my decision, I absolutely would do it differently. But that's the way that our government structure is set up. And that's why it is so imperative that we don't dismiss these local elections. People will look, and I saw Judge Cubbage make a post a few minutes ago in the chat room. Don't forget about your judge races. What we do is have a tendency to go into the ballot box and we'll check the president we want and the vice president we want and maybe some of the larger races, but we don't flip that ballot over and we go down to the bottom. And they put those at the bottom on purpose because they know that most people are just going to go in, vote for president. We no longer can vote straight party like we used to back in the old days. So we got to absolutely, if we want to change the system, if we want to change how things are done, it begins with getting to that ballot box and voting in local elections and midterms. Midterms are very critical. That's how the Republican Party took over in 2010, because it was a 2011, it was a midterm, okay? And for the last 10 years, we have been catching it. Lastly, census. If you don't think that the census is as important as the election itself, you're missing the big picture. The only reason Wayne County got 2.3 million is because that's the number of people that were counted in the census. Anytime there's a disaster, anytime there is any type of allocation from the federal state government, your census data is used to determine how much your county gets. If your county is undercounted, your county will be underfunded. It's real simple. And so the census is directly tied to any type of support that your community will receive from the federal or the state government. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Judge Cubbage.
Again, remember, guys, I'm Superior Court Judge Lora Cubbage. I am running for the North Carolina Court of Appeals for seat 5. Please, please, please do not forget your judges. We will be on the back of the ballot. We will be at the bottom. However, we are at the top when you're talking about your rights and things that are guaranteed being enforced, because we are the last firewall of protection. So if you don't know who your judges is, you almost can just count yourself null and void. If there is a challenge to the legislative, if there's a challenge to the executive branch, it is going to come to the judicial branch, and we're going to make the final decision. And if the Court of Appeals doesn't make the final decision, the next place it's going is to the Supreme Court. So it is going to stop at the courts. Another thing, please, please consider running for office. You cannot win if you're not in, and that's just simple as that. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, like Representative Smith said. We'll all back you as soon as we know that you're willing to stick yourself out there, but please run. We need more African Americans in elected positions. We need our branches of government to reflect the demographics of our state. That is on your municipal level, your local level, as well as your state level. So again, Judge Lora Cubbage, North Carolina Court of Appeals for seat number 5. Thank you.
Thank you,
Can
Judge.
I vote, Judge?
Thank you, Judge. Greer.
Work hard and Durham.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for allowing me to be on the call today. I posted some information in the chat as well for ways that you can get involved here in the Triangle area. But I like to leave people with the big three, and that is donate or vote, establish true allyships, and protest. And what I mean by that is donate to anti-racist organizations, continue to educate yourself, especially our white brothers and sisters, on the history of this country, on how foundational, not even systemic, but foundational, everything is rooted in racism in this country. Voting, it's been mentioned before by the judge and other folks, it's so important to vote, not only in November, but in the municipal elections that are in these funky off years sometimes, to get representation in there that will do the work on behalf of the community. The second thing that I also encourage people to do is to establish true allyships, especially for our white brothers and sisters, or maybe our non-Black people of color. Establish yourself as a true ally for your colleagues, for your friends, for your neighbors, for your family. And really put yourself out there. Maybe that means taking a back seat and really listening and then acting on behalf of your Black friends. The third thing, again, is protest. If you can be out in the streets wearing a mask, I highly encourage you to do so if there's something going on in your area. If not, you can protest, like I said earlier, by writing letters, by writing strong letters of support for the people on the ground, for the deterioration and taking away of tear gas, for accountability to your elected leaders. You can also protest by donating supplies, whether that be masks, hand sanitizer, to the people on the ground, and continuing to push on social media. Our website is rallydemandsjustice.com, and on there we have links to each area in the North Carolina, in the state, as to how you can get involved and on what type of demands you can make to your city councils and to your municipal leaders. And so again, thank you. That is my big three. And feel free to reach out to me. My social media is just my name, @Greear Webb, and I'll be happy to answer any questions and let you know more about how you can get involved.
Thank you so much, Greer. President Donnell. You got to unmute yourself.
Thank you guys for this wonderful event today. And I would leave you with several things. Don't forget to vote the entire ballot, complete your census, and most importantly, if your precinct is not organized, get it organized, because that is key to you having a voice in your local Democratic Party and the state party. And secondly, and finally, what I'd like to say is that if you don't have African American caucus in your county, please contact your parents or your auntie, your grandma, or whomever, because we really need to get those groups organized in order to get the people, help get the people in those unorganized counties galvanized to do what they need to do to encourage African Americans to run for office, and also to keep them involved with the pulse as to what's going on in the community, so they will have some voice as to what's going on in their community. So thank you very much for today, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, President. So passing it over to President Devontae Wilson of YDNC for the closing, him and Chairwoman Tia Kanda for the closing remarks.
Absolutely. Just want to hop in real quick. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. We greatly appreciate it. Again, thank you, Kelvin. Thank you, Tia. Thank you, Dominique. Thank you, Quentin. Y'all have done a splendid job. And again, speaking on behalf of President Joshua, he actually had to go to step into another Zoom, so he had to leave us a few minutes early. He made mention of that. So I did want to make mention of that. In the chat, we did make mention that if you want to be involved with the Young Dems or know anything that we're doing, our website is there. And again, thank you again. And one thing I noticed pretty much on the panel, and then pass off to Tia, is the difference in generations that we're blessed to have on this panel today. I think in terms of scripture where it says that the young are strong, but the older know the way. And so I hope eventually we come to a point where we can come together and bridge these generational divides that have transpired over time, that we come together because we need each other more than ever. All right. Thank you so much. God bless. Tia, you can go ahead and close us out. Thank you again, everybody.
All right, thank you, Devontae. To echo what Devontae was saying, thank you all for being on this call, this town hall discussion. Thank you to our panelists, our moderators. Thank you to everyone who hopped on with us. Again, It's been a great time. We had a really good conversation. I love when we can have conversation about this because everything that we do from here on out is important. Not to say everything we haven't done before is important, but now it's like really important because we see all the changes that are happening in our country that aren't looking good for us. But to know that we have people on this call who are here to advocate for us and who are here to represent us and who are here to be in community with us is really important. So I want to say thank you again. And I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Enjoy your weekend.
Have a good one, Judge.